Right. And so do you have any thoughts about like why that is and exactly what is happening? I mean, like you have a lot of people look at this from like a political perspective,
Yeah.
but there's also, I mean, when something seems to be happening on this scale and happening all over the place, to me, I'm naturally drawn to look for some kind of something broader or more perhaps metaphysical. I mean, do you have any thoughts about exactly what's actually happening right now?
I do. And, the thing about politics, politics follows culture. All of the politics today, let's say in regard to gender, I went to art college 30 years ago, and all the stuff that's in the mainstream politics today is exactly what was on vogue in art colleges 3 decades ago. Politics always follows culture, which follows some kind of metaphysics, like philosophy or religion. So politics is the end, and people who try to change things through politics are sort of butting heads with the opposition. It's already, in a sense, getting too late. But I think it's an extremely long trajectory. Certainly much of our politics today and much of our worldview is really a kind of metastasized and secularized Christianity, equality. We don't like the rich, but a real emphasis on equality, maybe on individuality. Certainly, equality especially comes out of Christianity. It doesn't make much sense in regard to Buddhism or Hinduism or even Islam to a certain degree. And people think that it does because they project Western values onto these other religions. And of course, these other religions, when they get to the West, are happy to play that game. Oh, yes, equality, wonderful. But, it doesn't make any sense in regard to Hinduism, Buddhism, or most other religions. It's, in a sense, it's a very Western thing. And, it's a good idea that we treat people equally under the law, for example. And that's a very radical idea. But, equality as a goal where everybody's forced to be the same yet different is unachievable, of course. But I think it has a very long history. It's partly rooted in Christianity, but I would say probably a turning. Well, there's been several turning points. One of which, of course, was really Darwinism, and then following on from that, psychology, which sort of overturned Christianity as a religion or badly damaged it as a religion, which meant that it wasn't something that the entire society subscribed to anymore. And of course, Christianity's numbers have declined and are still declining. And even in America, which is more religious than most European countries, it's definitely going to be much, much more secular in the next few decades, as fewer and fewer younger people regard themselves as Christian in any meaningful sense. But beyond, Darwinism, psychology, I guess the Industrial Revolution as well, science. The other major factor over the last couple of hundred years was probably World War I, which really was probably one of the final nails in the coffin of revering tradition. The churches were behind the good war, the Great War, and then millions of men went off and lived in trenches in no man's land and were slaughtered by machines in a type of warfare that they had never seen before, and came back blinded or with limbs missing or suffering from mustard gas attacks. It was the first sort of mechanized warfare, and that completely transformed the psyche. So you had the pacifist movement, and people were, believed that pacifism was the answer. No more wars, and then of course there was World War II after that, and so the pacifist movement came to an end. But all of this badly damaged the Western psyche. And I grew up in Great Britain, and my parents, who were born in or around World War II, were more materially inclined than I am. I'm more interested in spirituality, but I can absolutely see why that would be their orientation. My father in particular grew up in a pretty poor area of London, and he would play on the bomb sites. Much of London was still, a physical wreckage, and they grew up on, eating rations, and as a really very poor environment for most people in Great Britain, and I'm sure it was the same in much of Europe as well. I think rationing went on till 1953.
Wow.
And so so when you think about that, you can kind of see why you get the hippies in the 1960s who are rebelling against that. These are people that either experience some kind of rationing, certainly, bomb craters and rubble everywhere, or came just slightly after that. So, and then with the 60s, you get a kind of new revolution in thinking in the West. So I think it's, this kind of knock-on effect over a very long period.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like when you say that, there's almost like a cyclical nature to just people, you go from the materialistic to the spiritual, because they're all reacting to each other, like one leads into the other, which leads into these miniature arcs.
Yeah.
But as you said at the beginning of this, like what's happening now seems to be exceptional beyond those usual miniature cycles that happen within cultures. I mean, it seems like an upheaval for the ages. And,
definitely.
And why do you think it's so pronounced right now? I mean, like,
yeah, well, I think it's it partly is that Christianity is no longer a faith that can keep at bay other ideas. So that's certainly the case. And the religion itself, politics itself has become a religion, I think, both on the left and the right, actually. Although the criticism of the right is that this is the case only on the left. I mean, it's certainly the case there. The hysteria, the irrational beliefs that change constantly from one thing to another, that must be believed in and then are forgotten about 3 weeks later, and no one remembers that they believed in it and were hysterical about it. I mean, these are all kind of manifestations of a religious and fundamentalist mindset. But, certainly on the right, I think, there is, it's typically not as hysterical. Sometimes it is. But I think also the politics has become a religion, and the references to Christianity are often little more than lip service, or people will say, well, I'm a cultural Christian or something like that, because they don't actually believe in the doctrines of Christianity. So I think, politics has become the new religion. So that's certainly part of it. And then, you have all these sort of ideas that are filtered into, mainstream culture and politics through, art colleges, which picked up on all kinds of interesting things around the world, modern and ancient. It sort of filtered into, more popular culture like pop music, and then it filtered into the broader society, and then into politics, where it becomes kind of radicalized, because politics is inherently adversarial, of course, and you use these things to attack other people, not because you necessarily believe them yourself.